Hilchos Parah Adumah Perek Revi, the laws of the red cow, chapter 4. This video is being recorded on Yutes Kislev for tomorrow, for Shabbos, Chaf Kislev, both days, the most special days on the Chabad calendar, the new year for Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe's liberation. And we wish Lashana Tova to have a good year, Belimud Chassidus, of Darkei Chassidus, learning Chassidus and conducting ourselves in the ways of Chassidus. Tikasevu v'seichasemu. You should be inscribed and sealed. Whenever you see the video, whether it's before Shabbos or after Shabbos, it's a time for Farbrengens, as we had the other night, the night of Yutes Kislev, but also the next nights. It's customary with family, with friends, to find time to become inspired and take resolutions, specifically in the area of studying Chassidus. And now to the Rambam. We are talking about the Parah Adumah, the process of the red cow. Yesterday in chapter 3, we learned all about the process as it's supposed to be done. You're supposed to bring the cow across that ramp from the Rabbi, from Temple Mount all the way to Mount Olives. Over there it was slaughtered, then it was burnt, then the ash was collected, and then you take the ash and you mix it with the water and you create the Parah Adumah waters. Today's chapter is all about the potential things that could go wrong in this process. At every point, because we're talking about a sacrificial service where every single step is exact and precise, what happens if something was done wrong? So if something was done wrong, then we have to know, is it disqualifying the entire thing? Should the act just be redone? That's going to be today's chapter, all the potential things that could go wrong with the Parah Adumah and what to do if they were done. The Rambam first begins with the following halacha. Halacha Aleph, Ein sheichatin shtei pares adumais ke'achas. We're not allowed to slaughter two red cows at once, to create one big ash from both of them. Shenemar, because the verse that describes the Parah Adumah, what does it say? V'shachat oisa. You need to slaughter it. It is written in the singular. That means only one cow at a time. Halacha beis loy ratzasa parah latzeis. Where's that picture from yesterday? Walking across the ramp. The cow used to walk across from the Harabayis to the Haramishcha. What happens if the cow didn't want to go? And we know by nature a cow can be prodded to do something with social pressure. You bring another cow and you have it start to walk. So maybe the Parah Adumah will want to follow. So the sages or the Sanhedrin or whoever's leading the cow might be tempted to take another cow with it. Says the Rambam, if the parah doesn't want to go, ein moitziin ima shchayra. We're not allowed to take a black cow to go together with the red one. Shalo yemru, so people shouldn't say, people that are watching, not everybody actually makes it to the other side to see the ceremony. They just see them leaving. And they're leaving with a black cow. People are going to say, shchayra shachatu. They slaughtered a black cow, not a red cow. V'lo aduma. You can't even take a red cow together with a red cow. Shalo yemru shtayim shachatu. So people shouldn't say they slaughtered two cows, which is not allowed, as we just learned. You must figure out a way, even if the cow's being stubborn, come up with something to get the cow across alone without the accompaniment of any other cow. And now, moving on to the actual actions related to the Parah Adumah. So first, the slaughtering. Parah shenishchata shalei lishma. If the cow was slaughtered with the wrong intention, that means the kohen who was slaughtering it didn't have in mind that he's doing it for the Parah Adumah. Instead, he had in mind he's doing it for a different service, a different carbon. Oisha kibel shehiza shalei lishma. Or he received the blood from the slaughtering, or sprinkled it, which is a special sprinkling for the Parah Adumah, towards the heichal, towards the Beis Hamikdash. If he did that, also with the wrong intent, having in mind a different sacrifice, or he did part of the process with the proper intent, and the rest of the process with the improper intent, or he began with improper intent and he finished with proper intent. Bottom line is, somewhere along the shchita, kabbalah, hazah procedure, there was shalei lishma. Or it was performed not with a kohen, with a non-kohen, which is not allowed. Or even if it was a kohen, but the kohen wasn't wearing all the proper clothing. He was missing clothes. Missing clothes when it comes to temple service is a disqualifying factor. Or maybe the high priest did it, but he was wearing his regular golden clothes. As we saw the other day, if the kohen gadol does the Parah Adumah process, he has to wear the kohen hedyot clothes. Here he didn't do that. He wore his regular golden clothes. Or the kohen who did it was wearing regular, just not even kohen clothes at all, regular weekday clothes. In all of these cases, psula, the whole Parah Adumah is disqualified. Shchata, however, if the kohen slaughtered it, al menas lechol mibsara, or lishtes midama, on condition, meaning he's having in mind that he wants to eat some of the flesh, make a Parah Adumah steak, or drink some of the blood, which typically is not allowed. When it comes to other sacrifices, if you have in mind that you want to eat personally or drink personally the sacrifice, you're violating a prohibition. and it disqualifies the sacrifice. Here it doesn't. Ksheira, the Parah Adumah, is still kosher, lefi shalei nemar bareach nichayach. Because Torah doesn't employ the words reach nichayach, which means pleasant aroma for Hashem. Typically, every carbon is called reach nichayach la Hashem, which means it's reserved exclusively for God. We're not supposed to be wanting to partake of it. So if a Kohen has in mind to partake of it, it ruins the sacrifice. But here, Torah doesn't use the words reach nichayach, and therefore it's not a problem. Halacha dalid kibel dama bikli. If the Kohen received the blood in a vessel, in a utensil, instead of in his hand, psula, that also disqualifies the whole sacrifice. Shenemar, because the verse which describes the blood reception, it says, V'lokach Elazar hakoyin midama be'etzba'oi. Elazar the Kohen is supposed to take its blood with his fingers. Torah only uses the terminology of the fingers. Mitzvasa mitzvas yad v'lei mitzvas kli. This mitzvah here is meant to be done with the hand, not with a utensil. Halacha hey, hiza bikli. Same thing if you sprinkled the blood using a utensil, even if you received it by hand, but the sprinkling was done with a utensil. Afilu achas mehen, even one of the seven. Look at the end of the verse. What does it say? V'hiza el neichach pnei oyel moyed. You're supposed to sprinkle facing the oyel moyed. That's in the Mishkan's time, the tent of meeting. But later on, facing the holy temple, midama, you sprinkle from the blood sheva pa'amim, 7 times. So the Rambam here is saying, even if one of the sprinklings was done out of a utensil, haza'asai psula, the sprinkling is disqualified. Now throughout this chapter, when the Rambam uses the word haza'asai psula, you always have to wonder, does that mean that just the sprinkling is disqualified? The whole procedure though is still okay, and you can come and redo the sprinkling? Or does the disqualifying factor of the sprinkling disqualify the entire cow? And the commentaries comment on many of the cases to weigh in whether this is a local disqualification or a general disqualification. Here, it seems to be just a local disqualification. You could redo it, so to speak, and it'll be fine. Hiza achas mehen bismailai. If one of the sprinklings was done with the left hand instead of the right, psula, it's disqualified. Hizu shiva kohanim hazayasan ke'echad. If 7 kohanim came, instead of one kohen doing one at a time, 7 times, 7 kohanim came. They each took a little bit of blood, and together, simultaneously, they sprinkled all 7. Hazayasan psula. Their sprinkling is disqualified. Ze achar ze ksheira. But if they did it one after another, that's kosher. Because the Torah ideally says it should be the same kohen, but it could be 7 different kohenim is also fine. Hiza v'loi kivin keneged ha'heichal. What if the kohen sprinkled, but he didn't face it directly towards the heichal, towards the temple structure? Psula. That is disqualified. And here the commentaries say just the sprinkling is disqualified. He can go do it again, right, to the right direction, and it won't disqualify the cow. But what is the source that it has to be opposite the heichal and switching directions is a problem? Shenemar, because it says, El neichach pnei oyel moyed, towards the face of the tent of meeting. Ad sheyechavin keneged ha'heichal v'yirayehu, which means the Kohen has to be aligning himself towards the heichal and be able to see it. V'chein, and so too, even though in context, where does it say the words El neichach pnei oyel moyed? It only says that with regards to the sprinkling, says the Rambam, we derive from this that im shchata oisrafa shalei keneged ha'heichal, if the slaughtering before or the burning after was done not in an area that directly faces the heichal, psula, it's also disqualified. Shenemar, because it says v'shachat oisa lefanav, you have to slaughter it in front of you. And what does that mean? The commentaries explain that you have to look at the context of the verses. First it says v'shachat oisa lefanav, that's the slaughtering. Then it says v'hiza al neichach pnei oyel moyed, you sprinkle to the oyel moyed. And then it says v'saraf es hapara, you burn the cow. So from the fact that these verses are stated one after another, the condition over here can be applied to both the before and the after. The shchita, the hazah, and the sreifa all have to be done opposite the heichal, which is why this platform was set up where it was, because it was done exactly in an area that faced, if you would walk right down, it would meet the heichal, the opening to the temple structure. Halacha vav, bamed dvarim amurim. When do we say that not aligning yourself with the heichal is considered not kosher? If you really misaligned yourself. Shehiza oy saraf oy shachat keneged hadoraim oy keneged safin. When you sprinkled, burnt, or did the slaughtering literally to the south or to the north, totally off from the direction of the heichal. Oy shehaya achayrav lamikdash, or you put your back to the temple, so you were actually facing east. Avalim amad bein mizrach u'mayrav. But if the Kohen was generally in the proper place, he was standing between east and west, upanav keneged ha'heichal, and he was facing the heichal. Afal pi shalei kivin keneged ha'heichal, or some texts have keneged pesach ha'heichal. B'diktuk, even if you weren't exactly, precisely 100% facing the entranceway to the heichal, ksheira, that's still kosher. You're still in the general realm of the proper direction. When we say off the direction, we mean actually off, not a little bit off. I should point out, by the way, the Rabbi, however, argues on this. The Rabbi says no, as long as you're not exactly facing the Pnei Oyel Mayed, it's actually disqualified. Halacha Zayin, Chiser Achas Min HaMatanois, if the Kohen missed one of the sprinklings, he didn't do 7 sprinklings, he only did 6, let's say, Psula, the whole thing is disqualified, and the commentaries say the whole sprinkling is disqualified, not the whole cow. Just finish it up. You only did 6, do a 7th one. Taval Shtayim, V'hiza Achas, what if the Kohen immersed his finger twice in the blood and only sprinkled once? As we saw yesterday, the proper way to do it is to dip and sprinkle. Dip and sprinkle. Dip the finger before every sprinkling. What if the Kohen dipped twice? 1, 2, and then did only 1 sprinkling? Says the Rambam has a asay psula. The sprinkling is disqualified because it's not meant to be a sprinkling from 2 dips. Every dip is supposed to lead to a sprinkling. Taval achas v'hiza shtayim. What if the Kohen did only 1 immersion and 2 sprinklings? Based on that 1 immersion, afal pi shalei chishev hazah shniya, even if he didn't end up counting the 2nd sprinkling in the count. It was a total mistake. He was in the middle of counting 5, then he goes 6, and then 2 sprinklings came out, and then he goes, you know what, I'm not even going to count that 7th one, I'm going to do another one. Doesn't matter. Ela taval v'hiza acheres, even if he dipped it and sprinkled again, hazah yasei psula. The sprinkling is disqualified, and in fact the commentaries over here say the whole cow is disqualified because there's no way to fix this. If you did a sprinkling without dipping your finger before, you've basically done extra malacha, extra work, while doing the service of the Parah Adumah. And as we're going to see in the end of today's chapter, and it's going to be a big discussion in later chapters, while doing the Parah Adumah, the person has to be exclusively focused on what he's doing. If you do anything else that qualifies as side work, the side work disqualifies the whole procedure. And so in this case, because you end up having a sprinkling without an immersion before it, that sprinkling becomes considered to be a side work, not involved in the process of the Parah Adumah, and disqualifies the entire procedure. The Rambam gives an example. What does it mean? Taval achas v'hiza shtayim. Ketzad, what does this look like? Taval etzboi tvilo shishis. Kohen dips his finger for the 6th time, v'hiza shishis ushviis, and from the finger comes out 2 sprinklings, 6 and 7. Afal pisha chazar v'taval etzboi v'hiza shviis. Even though he goes back, dips his finger again, and does the 7th sprinkling over, haza yasei psula, the sprinkling. And as the commentaries say, the whole cow is disqualified. Hiza mitvila shviis, shviis ushminis. But what if it was the 7th time? You were about to do the final sprinkling. You dip your hand in, and you sprinkle, and then comes out a 7th and an 8th. Afilu chazar v'taval tvila shminis v'hiza shminis, or even more so, you purposely go do an extra one. An 8th sprinkling with the 8th immersion, ksheira, that's kosher. When you're adding to the 7, your acts are inconsequential. Now, I just told you before that if you do side work, you disqualify the whole Parah Adumah process. So what do you mean? You're doing an 8th one over here, it's not a problem? So the Rambam immediately clarifies. That's provided that the guy who did the additional 8th sprinkling was another Kohen. But if it's the Kohen who was assigned to burning it, if he was the one who added, psula, the whole thing is disqualified because he was involved in something unnecessary during the burning. That's malacha, that's not directly associated with the cow, and disqualifies the whole cow. If the Kohen takes the blood outside of the ma'areches. Ma'areches is the name of the pile, but it basically means he goes away from the space that was aligned with the heichal. See, before we were talking about a Kohen who's standing in the proper place, but he sprinkles the blood to the wrong direction. This Kohen took the blood out of that location, out of the location which is opposite the heichal, and then did the hazaya. Then he does the sprinkling. Even if he manages to align the sprinkling with the heichal, psula, the whole cow is disqualified. That also doesn't meet the criteria of el nechach pnei oyel mayit. Funny enough, here the Rabbi argues and is more lenient. The Rabbi says this counts. As long as you manage to make it towards nechach pnei oyel mayit, we don't care about your starting point, and the cow is kosher. Halacha tes, hizam idama balayla. If any of the sprinkling of the blood was done by nighttime, Afilu hiza sheish hazayas bayayim. The achas balayla, even if you manage to get 6 out of the 7 sprinklings by day, and only the last one was by night, psula, the whole thing is disqualified. Yud shchata chutz mimkayim sreifasa, if you slaughtered the parah adumah outside the place where it's meant to be burnt, and meaning that same concept as before, you slaughtered it in a place that was not aligned with the heichal. Afilu shchata lifnei min hachema, even if you slaughtered it inside the walls of Jerusalem, psula, you're disqualified. Here we see an allusion to the commentaries I mentioned yesterday that the Rambam does not hold that Parah Adumah was done in Yerushalayim. Because here he says, you slaughtered in Yerushalayim, you are disqualified. The other commentaries say that Rambam is just saying, even if it happens to be that you were in Yerushalayim, as long as you weren't opposite the Heichal, you're no good. Yud Aleph, Srafa, Chutz Mimaracha, Shenishchata Aleha. If the ideal way we saw yesterday, the Parah Adumah is supposed to be taken onto the pile of wood and slaughtered there and burnt there. So let's say you slaughtered the Parah Adumah on the pile, but then you burnt it off of the pile where it was slaughtered. Or you divided the body in two. And you burnt it on 2 different piles. Or you burned 2 parah adumas that weren't slaughtered together, because otherwise that's a problem in and of itself, as we saw in the beginning of the chapter. Let's say it wasn't slaughtered together, but you burnt them together. Psula, in all of these cases, you make the whole thing disqualified. But if the first cow already became ash, maybe acheres, then you bring another one, you can burn it on top of the original one with no worries. Because you can't burn 2 parah adumas together, but one after another is fine. Halacha Yud Beis, ideally you're supposed to slaughter the parah aduma and simply set it on fire. Instead comes the Kohen, and he begins to kind of dissect the animal. Hifshita, he skins the parah aduma. V'nitcha, he cuts it into pieces, like you would do with other sacrifices in the temple, and not the parah aduma. He does it with the parah adum. And then he burns the whole thing. Ksheira, it's kosher. Now the commentaries explain it's kosher if you burnt it all as one unit. If you began to burn the hide, and then you burn the meat, and then you burn this, that's not okay, because it has to be burnt all together. Even what the Rambam is saying is only b'di'evad, after the fact. So certainly burning them separately is no good. However, if any part was lacking, afilu mi pirsha, even from the intestinal waste, psula, disqualified, because you have to burn the entire cow. Oh, here's a picture of the fire, the burning. Paka me'oira oy mibsara. Let us say it's already on the fire. It's already burning. And a part of the hide, or a part of the flesh, afilu misa'ara, even a part of the hair, kazayas, an olive-sized portion, is paka. Paka means it bursts out of the wood pile, and it lands up in a place that's not opposite the heichal. Yachazir, so simply return it. V'im loy hechazir psula. If not, if you didn't put it back, then it's actually disqualified, because now you have a piece of parah aduma that wasn't burnt in the proper way. Poka chutz l'marachta. If, however, it just burst out of the wood pile, but as the commentaries say, it didn't end up in a place that wasn't opposite the heichal. It burst out, let's say, to here, which is still opposite the heichal. So then, marbe olav v'serfei bimkoimai. Add some wood, add some fuel right there, and burn it in its place, because it's still opposite the heichal, so you're still fine. If a portion of the horns, hooves, or intestinal waste burst off of the fire, so when it comes to putting it on the fire, every piece has got to go. But once it's on the fire, if one of these 3 things pops off, you don't have to return them. Why? Because they're not even things that are integral to the parah aduma in its lifetime. If a parah aduma didn't have horns, or didn't have hooves, or didn't have any waste, it's still a parah aduma. So since it's not integral to its being while it was alive, once it's been put on the fire, even if it pops off, it's fine. Halacha Yud Gimel HaPara Eina Nifselas Belina. Parah aduma, unlike many other sacrificial services, does not become disqualified if left overnight. Lefichach, therefore, Im Nishchata Hayayim V'Hiza Dama Ki Ilchasei. So long as you slaughtered it on one day and you sprinkled the blood that day properly, because blood will become disqualified by staying overnight. But let's say you did the slaughtering and the sprinkling of the blood all on the same day, the nisrafa lemachar, and it was only burnt the next day, ksheira, that's kosher. Halacha Yudalid, srafa einin and mechusar kapara, if the Kohen involved in burning the parah aduma was an einin, he was in deep mourning, that means his relative had passed away before the burial, or he was in a state of impurity which required to bring a sacrifice, and he didn't bring that sacrifice. Ksheira, the parah aduma is still kosher. Tesvav, srafa, shalei b'kiddush adayim v'raglayim, if the Kohen had burnt it without washing his hands and feet. Typically, when a Kohen does sacrificial service, he's supposed to wash his hands and feet from the Kiyar in the Beis HaMikdash. This is no different if the Kohen does the service of the Parah Adumah burning without washing his hands and feet. Psula, it's disqualified. Because the deeds, the procedure involving the Parah Adumah resembles service in the temple. In the same way you'd wash your hands before service, you wash your hands and feet before this. Which, by the way, the commentaries say, even though the Rambam is talking about burning, but it would apply to everything. Ma'aseha, all of its deeds are resembling Avodah. Now, the question is, where should the Kohen involved in the Parah Adumah, where should he wash his hands and feet? So, you could say, since the whole service is being done outside, maybe you should wash over there. So the Rambam says no. Ideally, b'kli is bifnim. Ideally, you should use a holy utensil inside temple premises as usually done. But if he washed his hands outside, even if he used a mundane vessel, not a holy vessel, even in a pottery cup, which is considered to be degrading, kosher, it's still kosher. Since the Parah Adumah anyway is fully performed outside of temple premises, so the washing of the hands and feet before could also be done in such a way. Similarly, another difference between the Kohen over here and a regular Kohen is the following. When we have the Kohen immersed in the mikveh, after we make him impure, as we explained in chapter 1 and chapter 2, just to let everybody know that the Sadducees are wrong. We make everybody involved in the Parah Adumah tuvul yom. We make him impure, then put him in the mikveh and have him do the service while it's still day. So this Kohen, typically, if you remember way back from the Rambam's 8th book, when it comes to a regular Kohen who becomes impure, if he goes to the mikveh after impurity, he must wash his hands and feet again before continuing the service. Here says the Rambam, this Kohen, once he becomes immersed after his impurity, he doesn't have to wash hands and feet again, since anyway the entirety of the procedure was performed, or could be performed at least, with somebody who was a tvul yom, so we don't require the washing hands and feet again, either just put it into that special unique category of the Parah Adumah service. Let us say he burnt the Parah Adumah without wood. Ideally, it's supposed to be on a wood pile. He just set fire to the cow and wanted the cow to burn up in and of itself. Or he used all types of wood. Yesterday we saw it's supposed to be special types of wood that burns fast and has lots of ash, the fig wood, the oak wood, the pine wood, the cedar wood. He used any other wood. Even with straw or stubble. Ksheira, it is kosher. Umitzvasa, the only mitzvah is that you shouldn't put less wood than what's required. Avol marbehula, but later on, if the fire is going and you see you need more fuel, you can add chavile ezoiv, ve'ezoiv yain, or some have ve'ezoiv yavan. Bizman sreifa. During the burning, you can add bundles of hyssop and Greek hyssop to increase the ash if you see that you're going to need a little bit more fuel. Because as we saw yesterday, all the ash didn't just come from the Parah Adumah. It came from the Parah Adumah and the wood that was burning it. In fact, the Kohen can continue to add more wood for the burning up to the point where the Parah Adumah becomes ash. But once it becomes ash, if you even added one foreign piece of wood, it's like mixing oven ash with the Parah Adumah ash, which creates a major problem, even though typically in halacha we talk about bittul, nullification. If the substance is not significant, it becomes nullified. Here, it's an extra stringency, it doesn't become nullified, and it will ruin the entire ash pile. So don't do that after it becomes ash. Halacha Yud Zayin, the Rambam kind of summarizes. Kol Maseh HaParah mitchila v'ad soif. All the actions related to the Parah Adumah, all the parts of the procedure, from the beginning to the end, Einay Ella Bayoim. Number 1 has to be done by day. Number 2, Ubezichrei Kahuna, has to be done by male Kohanim. And number 3, V'hamalacha Poiseles Ba, doing side work, engaging in side work while doing the Parah Adumah procedure disqualifies the whole thing. But these 3 conditions only apply ad shetei oseh efer, to the point that it becomes ash. Avol mishetei oseh efer, but once it becomes ash, in kines efra balayla, let's say you gathered the ash, you collected the ash by nighttime, oisha kinsatu isha, or a woman was involved, not a Kohen, oisha asa malacha acheres b'shas knisaso, you did some other work while gathering, collecting the ash, hadizuk sheda, that's kosher. Uminayin, how do I know that any Jew can be involved in collecting the ash, except for the major 3, the deaf, mute, mentally unstable, and the child? Shenemar, because it says, V'osaf ish toher, a pure man should gather. The whole time it's talking about the Kohen. Then Torah changes the description, calls him ish toher. Miklal she'ena tzricha kohen. That already tells us that a Kohen is not required. And once a Kohen is not required, even though the word ish typically means man, male as versus female, uki'ilu amar adam tahar. We're going to translate it as if it says adam, which is human, a pure human. Bein ish, bein isha, whether it's a man or a woman. What is the source that work, engaging inside work, disqualifies the Parah Adumah? Shenemar, because it says, V'shachat oisa, you shall slaughter it. And some Rambams have the next word also, lefanov, because there's a debate. What's the source here? In one place, the Rambam writes that the source is from oisa. Slaughter it, and nothing else should be on your mind. The other way is the word lefanov, which is an extra word, teaches us that it should be front and center. Has to be in front of you, nothing else in front of you. We learn from tradition. This verse only comes to teach us that if you involve yourself with anything else while slaughtering, pasla, you have disqualified it. And not only slaughtering. V'nemar, it also says, V'saraf es hapara le'enav. You have to burn the cow by his eyes. Sheyiyu enav ba. Also the burning has to be exclusive. You must only be focused on the burning. That's the simple meaning. It's learned from the word le'enav. The Rambam, however, elsewhere writes that it's from the word es hapara. You slaughter the cow. You burn the cow. Just the cow. Nothing else should be on your mind. L'lamei, to teach us, shal malacha peseles ba, mishas shchita, ad shete'aseh efer. We just bookend it. From slaughtering to burning. From the beginning of the slaughter till it turns to ash, it's got to be the only thing on your mind. Malacha will disqualify it from the slaughtering to the burning. Anybody involved in the burning and does other work, pasla achate asa efer, disqualifies it until it becomes ash. That last line seems redundant. The commentaries say that Rambam is repeating it because it's only ha'oisik bisreifasa, only anybody that's involved in the burning. But if a person, let's say, were to do work during the throwing of the cedar wood and the hyssop and the red wool, which we saw yesterday, that would not disqualify it. Let's say you slaughtered the Parah Adumah and another animal ended up being slaughtered with it. You're using a long knife, all of a sudden you're in the middle of slaughtering the Parah Adumah, another animal runs in and boom, you just nailed it. A double slaughtering. Or a squash, don't ask me how, landed by the Parah Adumah and both were slaughtered together. Ksheda, that's kosher, because you didn't have in mind, you weren't trying to do that side work. Even though the animal that was slaughtered with it will be kosher to eat. Because the slaughtering of regular food doesn't require intent, that you're doing it for a certain purpose. But it doesn't ruin the Parah Adumah. But if you had in mind to cut the squash, or the commentary is that if you had in mind to slaughter the other animal, and it was cut during the slaughtering, psula, that's disqualified. That's you engaging in side work. You're supposed to be focused only on the Parah Adumah, meanwhile you're focused on your squash or your other animal. That's a problem and makes the whole thing disqualified.